Thank you so much for having me. And
Thank you.
Although, let me preface that I may be just as stumped and mystified by the actions of legislative stuff as any of you. So, but we'll.
But you still have to deal with it when it happens.
We still have to deal with it. Yeah.
So let's first of all talk a bit about yourself. How did you come to be COO of the state of Arizona?
Well, that's a good question. So a little bit about my background. I grew up in Willcox, Arizona, which is in southeastern Arizona, and small little rural town. Loved that community, and didn't ever have plans that I wanted to actually stay there for the rest of my life. But I do love calling it my hometown. I went to the University of Arizona. So sorry, ASU fans, but. Did both my undergraduate and graduate degrees at the university, and I had studied business and public management and as part of my undergrad, and then I have a master's in public administration. And like many college seniors, I was trying to figure out, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Sometimes being in the right place at the right time and meeting, mentors and opening yourself up to guidance and advice from other people, I struck up a friendship that turned into a strong mentorship, and he really became kind of like a grandfather to me. But he offered me an opportunity to stay on with the university when I was graduating with my undergrad, to work at the university in what's called business affairs. And my boss, he was the former city manager of Tucson, Arizona. And so in the years that I worked with him, I started to hear all the stories about city management, and it really began to dawn on me that profession was the most perfect job for me, because it was the crossroads between government. So I liked, government. I liked, a little bit of politics and how do you solve problems for the greater, community. But I also loved business, and I'd always thought about going into a corporate world or whatnot. And so city management was that perfect blend of being able to actually run government like a business and get a little bit of all of those things that I was seeking. So after my time with the university, I had an opportunity to actually go back to my hometown, but I would never recommend anyone being the city manager of their hometown, especially a small little community. Everyone remembers when you were this little, and they all had their list of things that they wanted done. But it was a great experience. I learned a tremendous amount. Did that for a few years, and then I had the opportunity to go to become the manager or deputy manager, and then became the manager in Marana, which is one of the fastest growing communities in Arizona, and was there for almost 13 years. And how I came to the state was I got literally a message from the governor's chief of staff, whom I had never met. And he asked if I had an interest in being the state's COO. And like you, I was like, what is the state COO? And so, went through a process and ended up just falling in love with not only the governor and the team, but the notion of being able to bring what have been so passionate about in local government to try to bring that at the state level. And so I started with the governor's office at the end of 2017.
Wow, terrific. So you were town manager of Marana, and before taking that position, how the position you have now as COO, how did town of Marana and how did that prepare you for what you do today? And then what do you wish you had known then that you know now?
There's a long list.
Yeah.
I think, working in, and you're in an industry where, building relationships and understanding what, your seller, kind of where they're hesitating or what their concerns are, understanding the buyer and what they're looking for, you over time begin to read people pretty well. And I think, that's critically important. And I think for me, working in local government, at the end of the day, we're all the same. We have our families, we have our lives. We want the best for those things, so understanding kind of that innate aspects of human nature. I think I was really able to think through and practice, if you will, on how do we host community conversations and engagement of issues. How do you take very complex topics and try to boil it down to things that most people can try to understand? Like you, and for myself, our government can be complex. It can be very confusing. There's many layers and different branches. There's different interests that are involved with it. So being able to try to distill that into something that the average person can really connect with and understand and help to either answer their question or guide them to the right place were things that I think I really picked up within that local community. It also, too, again, back to that business and running government like a business, that meant a lot to me. And again, when I think about the work that you all are involved in, if you don't treat your client well, you probably will never have them as a client again. But two, we all like to ruminate. We like to spread, our anger and frustration, and that gets around and that can impact your business. And so I always like to think of those dynamics that you have to face in your own private business as it relates to government. And with government, the challenge is it doesn't necessarily just go away if you don't do things really well, right? It continues on. It's not going to go necessarily bankrupt because we don't treat people with the best customer service, or we're not thinking about how do we, have the most efficient processes and systems in place. And so that meant a lot to me in local government, especially as I worked closely with our business community, business leaders, the chamber. I did many presentations with the Tucson Association of Realtors. And so I got a lot of feedback about when things went well and when things didn't go well. And we always pushed, our team to continue how do you perfect that relationship, and how do we exceed people's expectations when they're dealing with government? So that was, in my view, the most important thing that I gained, and what I'm applying here at the state is, we're here to serve. The whole purpose of a government is it's to serve us, the people. And when it doesn't do its job well, and I want you to think about, and I always share that if I could share this little story, so I want you to kind of go along with me in this sequence of events. If you get up in the morning, you wake up, you get ready, you get you get in your car, you're driving on one of our state highways, and let's say you're running late to get to work or meet a client, and you get pulled over by one of our state troopers. The trooper comes up, doesn't really, greet you at all. There's very little interaction. It is kind of very curt, and I'm going to give you a ticket and be on your way. So that's your good morning, right? And you now probably have a little bit of anger. You now have another thing that you're going to have to deal with, going to driver's school or pay a ticket. And so it's a little bit of a frustration, right? You get back out on that freeway, and let's say you get a few miles down the road and you hit a jarring pothole, huge pothole, right? Now you're a little upset. You're like, I get pulled over, they can't fix the potholes on the roadway. So now you're just, you're looking for anything that you can to say, gosh, they should be, fixing some of these things and addressing some of these issues. So let's say later that day in your office, and I'm going to pick on, and I always tell the poor department that I pick on, and this is the one that you and I, how we met, the Department of Revenue. So let's say you have to call the Department of Revenue and you need help from something that to navigate on their website. You get someone finally on the phone after having been put on hold for a long time. And that person, again, is just kind of like, I really can't help you. You need to find it on the website. Have a great day. You get home that night, you're watching TV, and you see a commercial that says, hey, the state of Arizona needs your help on something. We need citizen involvement in something. You're probably going to be, oh, heck no. I'm not gonna give one more penny to the state. and I'm not going to give my time to the state because I don't feel like I'm getting good value for what I'm already paying in taxes. I want you to reverse that situation. You get up in the morning, you get out on the freeway, you are speeding, you do get pulled over. When the trooper comes up to you, he explains why it's so important that we start to slow down. Let's say it's a safety corridor, and the officer says, we've had a number of terrible fatalities in this area. We're trying to remind people to please slow down. We don't want to have any more, lives lost. And let's say you even get a ticket out of it, but just the explanation and kind of that deep reminder of why it's important to be paying attention to how you're driving. You get back out on the freeway, you don't hit the potholes, so you don't have that experience. And when you call the Department of Revenue later that afternoon, the person literally takes the time to walk you through what you're needing online. And when you watch TV that night, you're probably going to be like, yeah, I had a good experience with our state government. And I feel like I'm getting good value for what it is. That's the power, and that's what I love about, how do we perfect that in every one of our agencies. We're a long ways from that, but how do we drive at getting every one of our state employees to really think about those interactions and how important it is, and the seeds that get planted, whether it's bad seeds or good seeds, in your all minds as citizens of our state, and how that compounds across the entire state of Arizona. So when we do our job really well and we do it consistently, great things I think can happen. And when we don't care about the customer, the citizen, I think that's where you get angst and frustration, and people take it into their own hands at the ballot box. So that's from my perspective.
So most of us are familiar with COOs in terms of the corporate world, but you are trying to bring in that business, but you have the constitutional constraints that you have to deal with. So you're in a different arena. Tell us what the CEO position for the state of Arizona is, and then what you do. Was there actually a job description, or how did I
haven't found the job description quite yet, but so not many states have adopted a chief operating officer role, and I actually last year worked with the National Governors Association to start to convene the other CEOs. There's about probably a little less, 15 or so that have states that have an actual CEO position. And they all vary to some degree of what they do, what they're engaged with, what the responsibilities are. But for our state, I'm actually the third chief operating officer. Governor Ducey was the first governor to actually introduce the position. And I'm very fortunate that the first two laid an incredible foundation. And I'll talk a little bit about that in just a little bit. But the foundation that they laid is what's called the Arizona Management System. So when I came in, I was able to build upon that and really kind of think about how do we shape our state government in a better way. So if I gave you a piece of clean paper, a white paper, and said, I want you to draw the perfect state government, you probably would not draw what we have with the layout of our current state structure. And if you think about our state structure, it is literally years and years and years of adding things to it, like any government. All state governments, our national government is the exact same way. The local government is, even your own business. Over time, you start to add things. I recently went through a move and was reminded, oh my gosh, how much stuff gets added is in closets that you've never realized was even there. So that's just part of our human nature, that we like to accrue things and store stuff and place things in different places. So I think this position and the work that I'm doing is kind of taking a step back and saying, all right, not only how do we really drive at efficiency within government, how do we make sure that we are best delivering service and programs and results to all of you, but also how could we reimagine some of it by realigning some functions? How do we really strengthen some of what the work that's done by the agencies? So that's kind of the area that I'm getting to work in, and I'll talk a little bit about the management system with another question that we have. So
let's expand a little bit on the whole CEO CEO, COO type of relationship. There are some COOs really concentrate on communications. It sounds like you are much more on the process and procedures type of let's get that core correct. How has the job changed since you first took it because you were able to implement some of that? What type of temperament do you think a good CEO has? Those type of quality characteristics. Let's talk about what that looks like, and then how do you interact with the governor with all the parts that you have to be aware of and getting him information, but also taking his information and implementing?
Good. So we may have you revisit a couple of those.
Yeah.
So temperament-wise, patience. Definitely lots of patience. But I think, certainly an absolute grounding with integrity, and I tend to be very non-political. I'm not really involved in that side of the house. I'm fortunate that I'm a member of the governor's senior team, and I do get to participate and listen to all of the discussions. But my view of this position is more of I need to be as objective as possible and drive at really working with the agencies. Some part of my job duties is I work closely with all 35 of the cabinet level agencies. So that's everything from Arizona Department of Transportation, Department of Revenue, Department of Health, the Department of Administration, Corrections, real estate, insurance, financial institutions, so the list goes on and on. So I work pretty closely, although it's difficult getting around to 35 different direct reports, but we do have systems in place to try to make sure that we've got good communications. So I do a lot of trying to build that team of agency leaders, and then work closely with the governor and the senior team in terms of representing what those issues are to the governor's senior team, and making sure that they're aware of critical issues that are taking place around Arizona, the needs of agencies as they're evolving or tackling particular issues or challenges. And then certainly, from the governor and from the senior team and through the legislative process, as things get approved as a bill, it's that implementation, making sure that the agencies are carrying out those directives appropriately.
So that has to incorporate some of the things like the state budget. So are you involved as far as giving information from the agency point of view in that process, or do you absorb the information and relay it back to them, or combination?
Mostly a supporting role. We have a deputy chief of staff that really oversees the budget process. Right. But I, do get to sit and be a part of those conversations. And we do, as part of my team, I've got a deputy chief of operations. So we'll trade off in terms of what agencies will sit in, so I don't have to sit in all 35.
Someone stand up and walk over there. Yeah. Jan, welcome down. There you go.
I like it. We're saving power. That's good. Yeah. Right now, as everyone knows, we're in the throes of the legislative process, and budget is starting to heat up, and all of the agency request was done last year, and so they're working to begin to work through the budget process.
Great. Okay. So I'm trying to make sure we get to some really important ones I want to make sure you talk about. We're going to skip ahead to the ones where we're going to skip ahead to TPT right now because it's how we met was with that, and we have several members who are interested. So we wrote to the governor's office about the experiences and frustrations of our property managers and property owners, and you read the packet, and that's how we met, was you coming in, talking to me, and then inviting WeMAR to be part of that process and opening that door of introduction to DOR, which we are in that process right now. So that has been, that was part of that management system and introducing lean, and the governor introduced lean a few years ago. So talk a little bit about what the lean program is, and then go into that management, that continuous improvement management system, and what that means. Good.
So is everyone here familiar with the concept lean principles? Basically, the history of it in terms of business application was Toyota was really wanting to eliminate waste as part of their assembly process, and from design to building the cars to delivery of the car. So through a number of process, what they call lean engineering, they identify every single step that is, what are the critical steps and what are the unnecessary ones. And they were able to really kind of perfect and were kind of the driving element of that whole initiative of TQM and lean principles. So in government, you don't always hear that, and it doesn't necessarily easily translate from what they did at Toyota or any other company into a government setting. But there are absolute, I would say, elements of, and this is what you got to kind of experience, of our overall, what we call the Arizona Management System, which is derived out of the principles of lean, is made up of 3 components. The first component is performance management. And in the most simplest terms, what that is it's identifying problems, identifying, could be opportunities, putting it up on a board so that it's visible, so actually writing out what the problem is, and then creating a cadence to actually begin to solve that problem. And you use metrics, data, to actually drive at solving that problem. So it's collecting lots of data points to make informed decisions that then cause you to act. And by putting it up on a board, and I don't know, have you visited the Department of Revenue?
Yeah, we spent all day with them a few weeks ago, and we're
Excellent.
going back next Tuesday to test out some of the 2 or 3 solutions and how that actually works.
So you're a survivor. That's great. A whole day at the Department of Revenue. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we're there.
Well, then you probably got to see what are called huddle boards, and they are literally boards, and we have these in every single agency, which is so cool. So every agency at every level within the state government, we are beginning to really do that, where we identify what are the critical issues. I'll take the Department of Revenue, one particular area, and that is the call center component. So when you as a taxpayer have questions about filing and you call the Department of Revenue number, I would say a couple years ago, you probably would have been in a queue of 45 minutes to the point where the system just would hang up on you, and then you would have to call back and get in the queue again. And we probably all have experienced that, right? Whether it's Department of Revenue or any company, that it can be very frustrating. So they have really driven. So they put that up on the board. They began to really drive at what are the issues related to that? What's causing that? What countermeasures could we put in place to really kind of make sure that we are driving down the amount of time that someone is on the phone waiting. So when you look at more of the heavy tax time, where there's going to be many more phone calls coming in, it is amazing to be over there to see how they now deploy using the Arizona Management System to make sure that the caller is getting answered in as short amount of time as possible. When it gets to more than a minute, 2 minutes, there's processes that are now put in place that literally all the way up through the director, he gets notified that, hey, we've got a problem, or we're starting to slip in terms of our response time, and they start deploying countermeasures to make sure that we're on top of that. So that's just one example. Has anyone been to a motor vehicle division lately? And
I was just thinking about that.
okay, good experience, hopefully. So all of that was because of the Arizona Management System. They literally began to engage the staff, the employees, and we want to fix this not only for the citizen, but we want to fix it for you guys, because they're frustrated too. I mean, they've got long lines and everyone's cranky, and it's not a great place to work, right? So by using these tools of performance management, they were literally able to transform almost all of our MVDs across the state. So if you go in there, I mean, it's going to be, pretty rare that you're going to be beyond 30 minutes in a motor vehicle division. And it could have been hours where you would wait for your number to be called. So I would say across the entire enterprise, there's some just incredible things that are taking place because of the Arizona Management System. So that first component is that performance management. The second is leader behaviors. And I'm sure all of you, I'm speaking to the choir about this, leadership matters, and it's what leadership, whether in a public setting or a private sector, business, people that are able to engage and have strong working relationships. So there's an element of one-on-one coaching that's very important. So we're training our supervisors to literally have conversations with their employees. Listen to what their employees are saying, and that's how you identify those problems that can get put up on the board. Having leaders actually go around, get out of their office and walk around and see what's going on. So we have what's called Gemba walks, and that is an opportunity where the leadership, again, all the way from a director level down to a frontline supervisor, they are spending time at those huddle boards, asking questions, listening to what's going on. So it's changing the whole way that people are operating and whatnot. And then the third component is actually being a problem, how to solve problems. So how do you go through a problem-solving exercise and process? So there's a lot more to it than those three. There's a lot of other elements to it from behind the scenes. But basically, those three areas are what are helping to drive, in my view, a transformation of our state government. And I'm really pleased with some of the areas that have fully embraced it. We do have, and I'm sure you could probably share with me stories of where you've had a bad experience. But those are areas that we're continuing to really try to make sure that we're driving at. How do we deliver the best value to all of you as citizens of this state?
So I'm just going to go back to that problem-solving part, because in our process, one of the things that my members were telling me, because this is a little more complicated and intricate than when you run your own business. Mm-hmm. So we had sat with DOR in January-ish, and we, after that meeting, came out with 38 of our hot topics, things that really need to be attended to quickly, and we thought were pretty easy to deal with. So we said, here's the problem, here's our suggestion for 38 items. And when I had our all-day meeting last month, that was our agenda, was those let's go through them and see what can really be done. Obviously, we don't know what the internal capabilities or even some of the legal constraints are for DOR. So they were really good about coming back to us and saying, well, we can't do it that way because, and here's why, but we might be able to do it a different way. But one of my members, before we went to that meeting, were like, oh my gosh, what is the big deal? Here's what you do. You sit down, you have a staff meeting, you tell them how it's going to be, you send out a reminder email, and you tell them they got to do it, and if they don't do it, they're out of here.
I wish it were so simple.
So that is, for people who own their own businesses, I don't get it. It's taking us weeks, potentially months, to come up with what I can sit here and do in 10 minutes. So go a little more into that problem-solving process and why it's elongated for you, while we would go, that's easy.
Yeah, in your world, it most likely is, if you have an employee, mm-hmm. you can fire them if they aren't producing or at the level that you expect them. And there's really not, a lot of debate about it. In government, and I want all of us to kind of recognize, we live, we're in an incredible country, a democracy. A democracy is messy. It's a lot of people get to weigh in on every aspect of what we do, and working in government is a fishbowl, and it should be. We should be as transparent as possible, and we should be held accountable by all of you as shareholders, basically, of this enterprise. So when you create an environment like that, and expectations and thresholds, with that comes where there's going to be, you'll be more slow moving on making decisions, because if you make a decision in yours and you mess up, it's most likely going to be, something you have to eat, but you don't have to answer to unless you're part of a company, and I'm sure those behaviors are the same thing. You're going to be less likely to make a decision that's going to impact a whole host of other people. So you definitely see that in government. Your mistake probably is not going to end up on the front page of the newspaper. So that does create a culture where people are going to be very reticent to just quickly make decisions and say, yes, let's go and do that, Or even though it's simply laid out and we probably agree, like, yes, that would be nice if we could just do it that way. But because of having to go through certain protocols, you have to add, different layers to that. But using the tools of the Arizona management system, we do try to find areas where there's waste in the system. And let me I'll give you some examples. There was an agency that had gone through this process of how do we get a permit to our customers, our clients, in a shorter amount of time. So they did that same thing, a whole, what we call a Kaizen. They, literally mapped out the whole process. And as they started going through and asking critical questions of, well, why do we do this one step? Why do we have to have people get fingerprinted for that? And most people in the room were like, well, I don't know. It's just been this way since I started here, and this is what I was taught to do. So then they're like, well, let's look into that. Let's find out why. Let's look at statute. Let's look at the rules. So as people dug deeper, they realized there was no statute and there was no rule. It had been added because probably someone had messed up years ago, and they said, well, to stop someone from messing up, let's add this step. Well, what it did is it added literally, I forget the number of days, it was like 60 days to the process. So by identifying that you didn't need to do that, they cut out 60 days from a person being able to get whatever the permit was that they were needing. So that's the value of really going through and critiquing things. Oftentimes in government is people, someone will make a mistake, and there's sometimes the overreaction of, oh my gosh, we need to have a new law about that. Rather than deal with that one thing, we sometimes overreact and we'll add layers. And that's oftentimes when you look at statute or you look at rule, it's probably been because somebody did something and it now required a new process to be put in place.
So let's talk more about the legislative branch. They pass laws, they get put on the governor's desk, he signs them or he vetoes them or lets them become law on their own. How do you interact with specific legislators or with the legislature in general when they're going through their processes to either educate them or even like lobby on behalf of a position? How do you interact with them?
Really, in my role, I don't have to engage much, or not. That's not my responsibility. So we do have a team within the governor's office, the legislative team that works hand in hand with members of the legislature. I do interact when there are specific questions about things that are going on within agencies, and so. I always like to think of it from my days in local government of working with the city council and council members that have questions about things. And so, many of them, all of them, they have their other jobs. It's a part-time legislature. So no one can be an expert in everything going on at the state. It's just impossible. There's so many layers and complex issues. So I think, I look at my role as if I can help give someone, or help educate or try to explain something in a way that makes sense. And then it helps them to be able to make decisions, be more informed, and hopefully, vote on better policy for all of us. So I do have certain issues that I work on, but not in a day-to-day type of a basis.
More of a voice for that agency at that time for whatever's hitting.
There could be questions from an operations perspective where, if this bill were passed, what would it mean? What are the unintended consequences, or what could it mean in terms of just impact to personnel and resources and those types of things?
So you do oversee the agencies. Can you talk a little bit about how you interact with the agencies and how you know basically where your hot button issues are within those agencies? That's a lot of people, a lot of things going on. You have to inform the governor, but then the governor at some point is going to also ask you to be the courier of initiatives to those agencies. So talk a little bit about your relationship and your interaction with those agencies.
Well, good question. The way I've dealing with 35 cabinet level agencies is, that's a lot of people to, if you think about trying to call all of them. It takes an effort and to literally sit down an hour-long meeting. That's 35 hours of time. It would be a whole week if you could actually schedule it like that. So I use a number of different tools. I mean, I obviously have phone conversations, I have regular standing meetings, and I have got a cadence where I meet at certain periodically with different agency directors. There are some agencies, as you can imagine, probably have a little bit more high profile and visibility and issues that get raised to the surface a lot more. So certainly have, more contact with some of those. We have other agencies that, they're doing everything well, and I'll just do my normal, monthly type of, there we go.
Go walk again, Jan.
Check in with them. But one of the things that we have created with Governor Ducey, and I actually had something similar in local government, but what we've done is we've taken the agencies and we've broken them down into kind of the core functions of state government. So there's education, which is kind of separate in our state. That's a separate elected official, but there is a group that does work on some education work. So we have a group that deals with public safety, natural resources, the health of people, and then there's what we call good government, or just overall good, effective government. And so those, they're called goal councils, and the goal councils are then made up of agencies that are in that sphere of things. So let's take natural resources. So you'd have like state land, game and fish, parks, DEQ, Department of Water. And so they get together on a regular basis, and that's an opportunity where me and the operations team and the policy team are able to sit with the agency directors and actually have conversations. We talk about goals and initiatives coming from the governor. So we've actually created a kind of a structure that actually allows for meetings to take place on a regular basis and to have dialogue amongst different agency directors. It also helps to drive or eliminate, reduce, you'll never eliminate, but reduce silos. So like in anything, and this again, human nature, even in large corporations, private sector, as it gets larger and you become more specialized with something, people start to wall off and say, well, this is how we do it over here, and that's how they do it over there. Government, very much the same. There's very entrenched silos. So these goal councils help to break down some of those silos. A couple good examples of things that you have probably read in the newspaper, or you may be familiar with, is the legislation that was passed last year for the opioid crisis, of trying to really address the increasing number of deaths that were occurring. That was really born out of that goal council process. So the Department of Health and other agency leaders started to identify data trends, and they brought it to the table, and we had, there was great conversations that were had, and they began working through a process. The governor signed off, and then they, were able to actually transform those efforts into legislation that's been implemented. You've probably seen a lot in the paper, and this is an ongoing one, ongoing effort, recidivism. So a lot of work has been done in that area where, if you think about most of the inmate population in Arizona, we have about 41,000, 42,000 people that are incarcerated. Most of them are going to be released, and they're going to return back to their homes, to the community. If they, and what, again, through using data, what we found is, if they're not set up with the right tools, they're going to recidivate. And guess who gets to pay for that cost? Every one of us. It's a lot cheaper to invest some dollars in, as an inmate is preparing to leave, to make sure that they have a driver's license or some form of ID when they get out. Prior to what was happening before this whole effort, is someone would get released and they don't have identification. Right. Many times they certainly don't have a job. Their family may have rejected them, so they end up back on the street. They get hungry, they commit another crime, and off we go back through the whole process again. So we've really started to look at data points of how can we begin to change that storyline. So we've worked closely with the private sector. home builders to actually, we have a site at the Lewis Prison, which is out by Buckeye, that we built. There's literally kind of a frame of a home, and we've got areas within the prison site that inmates can learn how to do electrical work, plumbing work, roofing, the framing, all of those types of things. So we're trying to make sure that they have skill sets that when they release, they're able to jump into a job. And if we're successful at this, then what that means is we not only stop the cycle going back into prison, but now they're hopefully a taxpayer, and they're paying into the system, and maybe they're able to rebuild their family and start a new life. So those are some of the things that come out of that process, and it's really exciting when you see those conversations taking place, and then the idea is born, and then to actually see the results.
Yeah. And actually, it's happened pretty quickly, all things considered, when you think about what had to go in from idea to actual happening.
Absolutely.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Where's the ball? John, give him the ball. Hang on a second. Everyone needs to hear. It's okay.
I've never seen a speaker ball before. That's pretty,
Hello. Well, it works. It actually
does.
works. Oh, no, it works. Have you had the prison, I guess you call it, manual work education program in place long enough to be able to follow any of these guys or the group of guys as a group or ladies and find out if they are behaving better than a group that doesn't get this education or this training? We
at this point, you need really, there's like 3-year and beyond indicator points of was somebody successfully able to leave, the facility, get a job, and keep that job. And so we are not quite there at that point, but anecdotally, we do try to gather that information. And there are some real success stories where we've had inmates that have been able to learn some new skill sets, get a job, and we're starting to see some of those things. So I would say in another probably 1.5 years is when we'll have some better data on how well the program's doing. But it is something that we're constantly monitoring. We are also thinking about, are there other things that we need to add into the mix to help make sure that they're as successful as possible. I'll just share a story with, and this was an individual, I toured the Lewis prison, and I was in the area where we had inmates that were learning how to write a resume. And some of the inmates got to get up and talk and explain what was going on in that particular room. And one of them shared this story with me that it was just so touching. He said, I'm 35 years old. This is the 7th time I've been in prison, which means that almost his entire adult life has been in prison. And he said this program and the teachers that are there sitting with them, it was the first time that anyone had ever shown them any bit of love or that there's a pathway to something better. And just as he was talking about that, it just really dawned on me that if you've never had someone to show you the way, how would you know? And so I think these programs are so important that we're actually taking time to try to give people the opportunity to learn how to write that resume and to have a fighting chance to be able to get their foot in the door so they could get a job and make their way. So yes, good question, but we're not probably there with a decisive data point, but we're getting there.
Okay, we have a question here and then back there. Go ahead.
So once you get them where they can get jobs and start making that income, are you guys doing something for the housing? Because the market, we're in real estate, so you take those people with the criminal background.
Yeah.
Now they're trying to rent a house or rent an apartment. And some of these criminals didn't have money for attorneys, so they may be innocent, but they didn't have the money for attorneys, and our system, our county attorneys let them down. And so they took plea deals, but it gave them a criminal background. Now they're having to get housing in areas where you have hardened criminals that aren't trying to get better, and now you're taking someone that is trying to improve their life, but they're not getting into areas of people that are help keep building them up. They're getting stuck, and their families along with them if they're married. So now you're putting them down where they've gotten skills, but now they can't get into a living environment. Are they looking at changing some of those rules in the housing with property management stuff? And I was in an office and they were trying to show someone, they're like, oh, well, he can't get in because he's a criminal. And I said, stop. Do you know why he's a criminal, for one? And two, you shouldn't be talking that way because you don't know the whole story. But they couldn't find him a house anywhere. So they ended up, no offense, but they ended up down south where all of them are congregating and some are improving and some aren't.
Right.
What do you do? Are you guys looking at something to take it further than just helping them get jobs, but now helping them get into better housing and
So
for
that
them and their
was
families?
that was part of one of the, I would say, secondary things that we're now starting to really think about is what can we do from a housing perspective? And as you just described, it's complex. I mean, you have, there could be inmates that the record is recoverable. They're able to still go out and get a job, and there could be records that are very, they've committed things that are horrific, but they're free. They're out in our community, and many of them, they can end up homeless. And if you've been in downtown Phoenix in that area, I mean, you can see, individuals that, don't have any bit of shelter. So that is a piece that we are now starting to have discussions on, is what can we do from a housing perspective and shelter perspective. And this market it's good for all of you guys. It's a hot market, but that has also created huge issues in terms of affordability. And if you're just starting out, it's a challenge to be able to find a place. So we are, I don't have anything specific that because we're just starting that piece of it, but it is a full range of looking at, how can you, from shelter to affordable housing type opportunities, working with the private sector to actually build facilities that would be able to accommodate some of these things. So those are all conversations that people are having at this particular time. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
One more question there, and we'll come back up to you. Yeah.
Since you brought it up, I have my own perspective on that. Retired law enforcement, I don't have that warm, fuzzy feeling. I think if we start providing all these things in education, obviously we're going to have a whole lot more people committing petty crimes to get in there. But that's just my opinion. But you brought it up, the homeless. So are we providing the same amount of money and programming for our homeless, like getting them driver's license, getting them a roof over their head, teaching them what I had to put my kids through college, but giving them free education? Are we doing the same thing for them to take them off our streets? Because in El Mirage, they're on all the corners. Greenway and the freeway, the I-17, they're on all those corners, Bell Road and the 17. They're everywhere with signs that it's almost obstructive. So just was curious.
So as I talked about that goal council process, we have what we call a breakthrough project dealing with homelessness. And so I think the state's role is more about as a convener, and it takes the local governments all through the whole metro area to help address this, nonprofits, religious institutions to really come to the table and start to think about the different ways that we can, homelessness is not, again, it's a complex issue and there's different levels and degrees. You have mental health issues, severe mental health issues, and that's not, easily just quickly solved. To people that just can't afford an apartment anymore, the rates have gone up, and so they've now been put out on the street. So, from that, where if we could try to get rapid rehousing, and because the longer someone's out on the street, the more complex the issues become. So there is a whole group that's been put together through what's called this Breakthrough Initiative, working with the Human Services Campus in the downtown area, and then a number of state agencies to start talking about how do we, address different elements of veteran homelessness. How could we try to make a dent there and make sure that we don't have veterans out on the street. So there is an effort underway. And the state is helping to convene those groups that are beginning to identify different solutions.
So it's funny because our initial meeting was about the opportunity zones.
The first part of
So
it,
the
yeah.
first thing that came to my mind was it would be great if the state tied into the opportunity zones and thought of a way to put money to those investors, that if they help some of this recidivism, help house, set up housing and get an incentive from the state to benefit them as well, then we might be able to help with this, right? Be a good opportunity for us to tie that all together.
That's where the
Okay?
Department of Housing and Commerce Authority and whatnot can all come together to help be a part of the solution for it.
Right, because the opportunity zones are in those areas
Right.
that, right? So there you go, you might be able to.
And you
put
are
something
seeing
together.
some investors coming in, the ones who have a project in mind for a particular area, they are coming in and they are layering those type of programs, exactly what you're talking about. How can we layer the different
To help bring
programs?
some of those-
So that we fulfill not just the initial housing, but other needs as well. So if you look at Surprise downtown, one of the things that's happening in that opportunity zone is the city's encouraging it, but they're giving incentives for not only the housing component, but also some of the mental health and some of the other social services that come in.
Right.
Teaching people back to the basics. Some people they've never had a budget in their life. They don't know how to
Right.
manage money. So they don't know how money flows in and how it flows out. And sometimes they get into trouble because they didn't realize the flow out was where it was. So they just need basic budgeting help. So City of Surprise in particular has been really active in that layering and encouraging people in that opportunity zone to help bring in those additional programs. So we're starting to see that momentum, yeah.
Yeah, because I think that's actually one of our biggest issues coming forward. I think it's behavioral health,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the drug addiction with the young people between 17, 25,
Right.
and falling into those traps,
Mm-hmm.
so.
Yeah. One more quick question, yeah.
Well, if you're dealing with the homeless,
And this is going to hand over to education, because I'll be honest, I have 2 special needs kids. And the state's requirement for them as being autistic children is 3%. They only require 3% of the 3rd graders to read at 3rd grade level before they push them to 4th grade. And it's not because they can't do it, it's because they learn differently. But I can see and I fight with the district constantly, and I'm in a big battle now. If they push my children onto 4th grade and I'm asking them to be held back, I can see down the future they're going to become, if something happens to me, they're going to end up on the street. And they're going to become addicted to drugs. They're going to become a problem. But it starts at the education level. Why I can't get my school voucher to take them to a school that can teach the way they are. It ends up kind of homeless and all of that. If you look at some of those homeless, some of them have been, the schools have created it. And as parents, and we fight for our kids, we can only fight so hard if the school isn't willing to let go of the funding to go to another school that they can learn. So it's kind of like a correlation. Are you guys working with that separate part as education and really finding out why these people are homeless so that you can help them better to get them off the street? Because I can guarantee you a lot of them, it's the educational part.
So from with the homelessness breakthrough project, yes, those are conversations of, the different pathways to homelessness and how can we try to, reduce or intercept it at appropriate times. The issue that I talked about with affordability, and if you can try to help, if someone's recently become homeless, how can we quickly try to get rapid rehousing so that they're not out on the street for a longer period of time. So those are some of the things that they're talking about. From my perspective, I'm looking at from an operations perspective. Some of that gets into policy realm and whatnot. What I drive at is again, making sure that we're using data that the agencies collect to make informed decisions, and that once we have a process that it's as efficient as possible to deliver on, that expectation that the community has of whatever the agency's working on. So that's the work that I really am involved with, is to really help complement the work that is being done, at the legislative level, and then the governor's office with the policy officials to really think through those issues.
Okay, we only have a couple of minutes left, so I want to close with a couple of quick questions for you. First of all, what's the favorite part of your job for you?
I would say, I've talked about a couple, just I think exciting projects. When you get to see a tour at DMV and you see actually smiling people getting their driver's license, that is, to me, it's very rewarding when you can take something that everyone's given up on and they just say, oh, government's broke, it can't be fixed. And you actually get to see a transformation. And so not only the look on your guys' face when you're going through that process, but I mean, our employees, imagine working in that environment where it's frustrating. They, if it's broken and they hear nothing but complaints all the time, it's like a downward spiral, And so I love when we have been able to put something up on a board and the team's able to come together and you actually see a change is extremely rewarding. And that's what I every day get up hoping that we're able to accomplish across the enterprise.
Great. And then what do you see? What are your hopes and what do you see for Arizona's future?
Well, I think it's an incredibly bright future. We're, Maricopa County, again, one of the fastest growing county in the nation. And the way I look at that is people have choices where they move. No one is forced to have to move to a particular state or to a particular community. And I always talked about this in local government. I always thought of it as a competition, as if I could get in, and I would always go to our realtors, and I would speak with them quite often of, we want to sell our community. We want to make sure that we are providing the best service, the best experience, the best environment, and we want to attract people to want to move to our particular community and be a part of it. And I think that you see that with our state as a whole. It's an incredible state, wonderful, beautiful history, incredible topography. A little bit hot in the summer,
That's okay.
but it is, I think it's a quality of life that is attracting people. There's job opportunities, there's good housing opportunities. You drive around many of our neighborhoods, there's beautiful areas where you can live and interact. There's so I think an overall quality that is drawing people to it. And I think hopefully with all the things that we're doing at the state level and then certainly all the local governments of what they're doing, I think it's a very bright future that is going to continue to attract not only people, but you're starting to really see incredible corporate investment because, high-tech companies are wanting to be here. And once that synergy starts, it just starts feeding off of itself, and you start drawing more people that want to be a part of our great state.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming. We have so enjoyed meeting you and speaking with you. Please come up, say hi to Chief Davidson, and please, he has business cards over here, so you can pick up his business card. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.